Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started now. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I know it's been a long, productive week, so we're grateful that you came over to see us this morning. So this session really came out of conversations that I've been having with my colleagues at Cambridge. My name's Sarah Forsyth, and I'm the Senior Library Sales Representative at Cambridge for Canada. And we've had active EBA programs in North America for about 5 years now at Cambridge. And we've really seen an uptake in participation, I would say, in the last 2 years, which is great for us. But we've sort of learned that libraries really have wildly different reasons for entering into EBA programs, for renewing them, for canceling them. And because the Cambridge EBA is sort of a one-year flexible model, there is a degree of uncertainty as a sales rep when it comes time to renew. Because we found that a successful EBA looks different at every institution. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. So in my territory, I started to think about if a library signs up for a new EBA, reasonably how long can I expect them to renew? And furthermore, is EBA always the best fit for an institution? So to help shed light on my questions and sort of lift behind the veil of the decision-making process, we have 3 librarians, collection librarians from across Canada. And they're really going to share their institution's approach to EBA within their overall collection development strategy. You're going to hear from the perspective of high research ARL member institution libraries that really serve a broad swath of the academic community. And they're going to share how EBA has worked or doesn't work for them. So we have Robert Thiessen from the University of Calgary, Ariel Lomness from the University of British Columbia, and I just want to acknowledge Ariel's colleague, Ellen George, who was instrumental in putting these slides together, but couldn't attend the conference due to a scheduling conflict. And then finally, we have Louis Uhl from McGill University. So each presenter is going to speak for about 10-ish minutes. I have some questions for them, and then we can open it to you all for questions as well. So we'll get started with Robert.
So I guess the University of Calgary is EBA light, because we have a practice of dipping in and out of EBAs. So the University of Calgary is located in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. If you're looking for a US reference point, we're a 15-hour drive pretty much straight north of Salt Lake City. We were the site of the 1988 Winter Olympics. We have 29,000 students, FTE, and I just went with our officially published statistics, so there's always a little bit of lag time. In 16-17, we had a budget of 12.7 million Canadian. According to this morning's exchange rate, that would be about 9.6 million US. So book buying before EBAs. About 7, 8, 9 years ago, we had an AUL of collections who was convinced that most publishers wouldn't publish their own electronic books, and that we should pick an aggregator and then we'd buy all or almost all of our ebooks from one source. So we did a variety of searching a number of years back and went with eBrary and then used YBP at the time to provide us with DDA. And that was extremely popular. We love DDA. In spite of the fact that we use DDA and we're e-preferred, we also got lots of print. And of course, we still had subscription ebook packages. Academic Complete, of course, used eBrary at the time. And Oxford Scholarship Online, which of course was different because it was a publisher package, but that was all subscription. That was all popular. And we were very, very happy. And then twin crises hit our book acquisitions. With the really bad year being 2015. And so short-term loans and the exchange rate. And so I think the short-term loan crisis was pretty much the same as the short-term loan crisis in the US. We loved DDA. It was a great way of acquiring ebooks. Initially, we had 2 short-term loans, and the third use triggered a purchase. But short-term loans were so cheap, 10%, 15% of list price, that we ended up moving to three short-term loans, and the fourth use triggered a purchase. And we loved that. That was a great model for us. But then, of course, the crisis hit. Short-term loans started going up and up and up. What was 10% became 25%, 35%, and there were, of course, publishers who had even higher prices than 35. I won't go there, but there were some pretty significant prices. And the other thing that publishers started doing is they started doing short-term loan embargoes, which meant that if it was Frontlist, usually the most current year, sometimes the most current 2 or 3 years, that a single use would automatically trigger a purchase. There'd be no short-term loans. And so in the 2015-16 fiscal year, actually probably going back to 2014-15, we kept removing publishers with high STLs and publishers with embargoes. And both ProQuest and YBP tried to keep us up to date, but things seemed to keep changing daily. And so we kept removing more and more publishers, making our updates more and more frequently. And then we just abandoned DDA, and I'll talk a bit more about that because it was also tied into our exchange rate problems. So in 2015, the Canadian dollar submarined. And to be fair, it wasn't just a number of countries' currencies dropped against the US dollar. So it wasn't just Canada, but I'll only talk about Canadian experience. So in 3 months, the dollar dropped by 17%. Over the entire year, the dollar dropped by 23%, which had a huge impact on our spending. And at the University of Calgary, and I think we're somewhat typical in this, 85% of our collections expenditures are in US dollars. So if the Canadian dollar drops, that causes us a great deal of pain. And 2015 was a very volatile year for us. So we overhauled our approval plan, but it was less efficient. Or in YBP Gobi terms, we moved our approval plan to virtual mode, so we didn't actually buy anything. And then YBP kept coming to Calgary to help us figure out a new, less acquisitive approval plan. And I had the impression from talking with the Gobi people that we weren't the only Canadian customer. They kept coming to visit, trying to hold our hand and figured a new way forward. So we cut our budget drastically. We ended up cutting our approval plans by 50%. But even though we were spending 50% less, our approval plans were less efficient than before. So we were having money left over at the end of the year. And my next 2 slides will just show you a bit of budget. So if you look, the blue is the budget, and the orange is what we ended up paying. So in 2015, when we halted our approval plan, we were 4 months into our fiscal year, and we had already spent over 100% of our budget. And then the next 3 years after our new approval plan started, we started spending less cash than we had budgeted. Or if you want numbers, 103% in 2015. And then we had this problem with year-end money because we weren't spending our approval plan. So the question came to be, what on earth should we do with that money? Because this was money we were planning to spend on monographs, and of course, if you don't use it, you lose it. So we did a number of different things, but I've just highlighted 4 things. The last one actually isn't approval plan, but it's another project to try to acquire books that we might otherwise be missing. But for the 3 fiscal years in a row, we bought an EBA and then so we would have used 2015 money for University Press Scholarship Online and would have paid for it just before the fiscal year ended. And so everything seemed to follow a year. We would pay for it just before the fiscal year ended, and then it would go into effect the next fiscal year. And that was a great model for us. We did, obviously, UPSO is Oxford. We bought a number of different packages, science packages from Elsevier Science Direct, and then, of course, Cambridge. Trying to think here. So we bought lots of books. We were very happy with all 3 EBAs. Each year we bought lots of titles. The prices, when you compare to elsewhere, weren't unreasonable. Of course, all of the books that we bought have unlimited use, so we don't have to worry about a single user or that kind of thing, which is often a problem with DDA. Another thing we really liked about demand-driven acquisition is that we felt that when we were buying books with DDA, we had proven use, and here we had the same thing, in a slightly different method with EBA. And I'll just go a little bit in depth into Cambridge. So with Cambridge, we bought 252 ebooks. 11 months into our EBA, Sarah sent us our 11-month use stats. So I did a proposed spend and emailed that out to our liaison librarians. And some of they had a minor intervention. There were 18 books that weren't on our acquisition list that we should have. So that moved things around a little bit. But 234 books were purchased were based on the most heavily used books. So one book received 855 uses in 1 year, down to our cutoff of 50 uses in the year. So those were all very popular books. The 18 books that we bought based on liaison intervention, I'm sure those are popular books as well. We had very strong use, and this was true for all 3 of our EBAs, is that we came to a cutoff based on the price we were being allowed to acquire. And there were lots more books that we could buy. So in the issue of Cambridge, we had another 654 books that received uses of 25 to 50 uses in the year that we had the Cambridge EBA. So we could have easily justified going another year at Cambridge, and that's really true with all 3 of our EBAs. The interesting thing about Cambridge is we had access to 38,000 titles, and only 6,000 received use over the entire year. So based on that thing, that also reinforced our willingness to stick with EBA, because we felt that we weren't getting the 5, 6s or that weren't getting use. And it's hard to say what would have happened over a longer term. And I think Ariel's up next.
So just to reiterate, my co-presenter is unfortunately not here. She didn't feel like traveling all the way to Charleston right after having gone to Europe. So it was a lot of back-to-back travel, but she is here in absentia, and she definitely contributed to these slides heavily. So the reason that I put this photo up on the slide deck was really to highlight that with evidence-based models, front lists, whatever your school might be doing, there is really no right way. In the same way that on our campus, there's no one way to make a street sign. You can see there's multiple ways to kind of get to the same end. So I do really feel that this is our approach to working with evidence-based models and front list packages, that we find what works for us. So we are an ARL library located in British Columbia, Canada, and between our 2 campuses, located about 4 hours apart, I am located on the Kelowna campus, we have 65,000 FTE students. And our collections budget as of last fiscal year was approximately $18.4 million between those 2 campuses. On my campus in particular, we had $1.4 million of that. And as Rob mentioned, the Canadian dollar was certainly a challenge. And just to put this in context, for us, we spent 80% of our collections budget on USD expenditures, and a 1 cent shift in that exchange rate can actually cause up to approximately a $100,000 difference on an invoice. So that really is impactful in the Canadian context. So again, in 2015 for us, that is when we saw that shift being made to evidence-based from DDA. And so we did partner with Cambridge, Taylor and Francis, and Wiley to provide evidence-based models at the time that were focused on Frontlist content. Wiley was the only one that we saw having everything open to us, just because of the nature of the program. So that was a little bit of a different context. And we really were looking for a predictable and sustainable spend for our library. And just to highlight as well, for Cambridge in particular, we were the first school in Canada to partner for an evidence-based model. So going on to 2019, we have actually continued every single one of the evidence-based models that we started in 2015. We've not canceled any of them, which I'm going to come back to a little bit later. And now what these programs look like for us is every single one of them is Frontlist and Backlist. So we have access to every piece of content that is available through an evidence-based model. And as of this past August, we've added Oxford Medicine Online. And that one is being maintained specifically through our medical branch library. So they really are focused on capitalizing on the selections that they were already doing through this platform and really turning that into a more evidence-based approach. Whereas the other three models are strictly through our ebook subcommittee that is a more centralized endeavor to manage these programs. But that isn't to say that that's all we do. So we do also take care of a lot of packages and subscription models. You can see the list of various publishers up there, and this isn't comprehensive. For the most part with these, we do actually facilitate 3-year deals. And just a brief couple thoughts about these and packages versus EBAs in general is for the packages, you definitely see those discounts, right? You can see and capitalize on those pretty easily versus the evidence-based models where you are usually paying list price. But with the evidence-based models, you do often have access to backfile content or you can negotiate that as part of a contract. So that's also advantageous. And then you get into the workflows. And it really depends on institutions and how they're approaching their evidence-based models. I know I've talked to some libraries where they strictly base this off of usage, and it can be very straightforward. At our institution, we actually do incorporate the selector requests. So that's a lot more hands-on management of those programs, and it does take a lot of time. So in that respect, workflows for purchasing packages is a lot easier for our institution. So we do kind of have to balance those in the decisions. So a little bit of pros and cons about evidence-based models in general. We find that it does offer a more predictable and sustainable spend, as I mentioned. It also provides access to that front list and the backlist, which usually, and our budget is a little bit higher than Rob mentioned for his, but as you can see, we probably wouldn't be able to buy all of those as frontlist and backlist purchases. So this offers an opportunity to balance that. We also now have established workflows for what that looks like for our institution, but that took us 4 years. That took a lot of growing pains to set those up. And then it also has resulted in a lot of nice yearly negotiations that move a lot smoother. And finally, and I added this after Ellen had kind of made this slide originally, and for me going through and as making those final selections as part of the evidence-based model, I feel like I have an increased content knowledge. Going through those and actually having an idea of what is of interest to our users, what is being highly used, but also what is important to the selectors. And finding that balance in between them, I feel I come out actually knowing more about what I'm buying. Versus with a package, I'm usually turning it on and I'm walking away. So that is a really big difference between acquiring both of those. Of course, a con is definitely the work involved during that final selection period. This can take quite a bit of time, but we do feel it is important to balance the usage and the selector requests. And one big con for us is definitely working with serial solutions. We have found this to be a particular challenge, especially at the end of contracts when titles are dropped for various reasons, rights negotiations, whatever have you around this. But to manage those individually can be quite time consuming for our e-resources and access team. So just to look a little bit at the financial value for us, in the 2018 year, you can see the number of titles that was in each of our 3 major collections. I won't identify which, but I'm sure you could probably tell. Of those, we also have the number of titles used. Now, we did exclude the owned content, so titles that we had purchased in the previous years of the evidence-based models, and then what that retail value would be if we purchased all of those. Now, For us, our evidence-based costs, the money that we were putting into these programs, only was about 2 to 5% of the cost of the retail value, so that final column there, of those unpurchased titles that were used during the program. So you might say, well, why not? You have so much usage, why not move that to a front list? But of course, it also comes down to expenditures, right? So you don't always have the money to move that program over. And as good as this data may be, this may be the only option for right now. And I do think that we have more to do with our front list to kind of take a look at this. So again, just to reiterate, we have not canceled any of these since 2015. So we're still in that process of looking through them. So what might cause us to cancel an EBA? Well, the budget. If, again, we have a massive change in the Canadian dollar, this very well might impact our decision. Another thing could be major changes from the publisher side. So if they close off allowing for backlist access or create programs where you have to choose between frontlist and backlist, that could definitely impact our decision. Very low usage stats could also come up, although we have not experienced that so far. We also might see a saturation point. So I know when I was evaluating one of the programs in the first year that we had it, it did look to be that the backlist content that we had access to, we also own in a lot of different ways already, historically, just being a large ARL institution. And so when you start to see that, you could see over time that there's going to be a saturation point with some of these models. And then you also have very high usage statistics. So again, looking at that previous slide, you might say, well, maybe I want to move this to a front list instead, but it's definitely dependent on cost. So hypothetically, we have had 3 scenarios at UBC that kind of lead us to feel maybe somewhat apprehensive about canceling an EBA. The first one was looking at a long-standing large subscription ebook package that we did cancel. For the first 4 months after we canceled that, it was consistent questions and requests every single day, complaint after complaint after complaint. So really that caused us to feel very concerned that that would be a lot of work immediately after canceling an evidence-based model. The second one, after one of our evidence-based models ended, we were negotiating into a second year, and unfortunately, we did have those titles turned off to us during that time period. So it was about a 6 to 8 week period. And unfortunately, working with Serial Solutions, that's the exact amount of time it takes for your record to pull out of the discovery layer. So during that exact period of time, we got a lot of complaints for access again. So unlike what you see in some of these presentations of breaking up big deals for journals, it seems to be that ebooks are getting used right away still, and people are coming to us right away and asking for them. Whereas I know in a lot of presentations around journals that it has been that the ILL requests have not gone up right away. So it's a really interesting kind of differentiation there. Finally, the third scenario was a DDA plan for streaming video, and we moved it to librarian-mediated selections just because of the cost that went wildly out of control. And it just really highlighted the budget surprises that can come up, the amount of money we have to set aside to repurchase some content that's going to be kind of valued going forward. So this is all to say, what if we did want to cancel one? We would definitely need a lot of time, at least 4 to 6 weeks to set up that discovery layer issue. We would need to communicate with our patrons, and that probably would need to take place at least 6 months in advance. We may require setting aside one-time budget money. That may require going to a whole fiscal year before. So when you start to think about canceling these, it can't just be instantaneous. It really has to have a long lead-up time. And so looking at also moving money around, so whether or not that means restructuring our budgets, putting them back into the branches rather than central, and then you also have to just expect some general pains. So finally, just some key takeaways. Definitely EBAs can provide that predictable spend. You can see that it provides access to content that we otherwise couldn't afford to buy. You may also see that it allows titles to be bought based off of demonstrated use, the whole point of evidence-based models, and it can provide excellent value for the cost. But what I would say coming out of this is that our institution really feels that there is no one way to do this. So going back to those street signs. So make whatever your budget is, make it work for your institution. Choose a program that works for you. And don't be afraid to change it.
Good morning. I'm from McGill, which is the eastern side of Canada. I don't have a map. We're just above New York State, Vermont, and Maine, just to give you an idea, in Montreal, beautiful Montreal, of course. What I'm presenting you here, McGill is not doing any EBA at all. Never did. I cannot say I never will, but for now, not. So I want to present you, it's more, premises is to do with, have we done the right choice by buying complete Frontlist or not? What if we would have gone in with EBA? So you'll see data about 5 collection years, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, with 3 publishers, Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley. So I'll go quickly because I have a lot of slides. I won't have time to show everything, but these are data just to show not only in cost-wise, but also usage-based to see over time the impact of that would have been. Okay, bear with me. All the slides, I'll go quickly. They're all the same thing. See the blue color, you see, like year 1, this is 2014 collection. They're all the same color for the sum of the slide. The red one, 2015. The green is for 2016 collection year. And purple, it's 2017. And the other light blue there, it's 2018. This is just to show, for Elsevier, this is the cumulated percentage of usage of each title, at least once. If we look in 2014, for instance, the first one, light blue there. So after 1 year, 59% of all titles have been used at least once. If you look, same thing 2014, in 2015, 79%. And if you look at year 3, which will be 2016 for 2014 collection, up to 90% of all the titles have been used at least once. And so forth, reaching, after 5 years, 94% of all the titles from collection 2014 have been used after 5 years. Okay? So same thing with all the, so similar trend for all publication year. And you have a similar trend also as well. Here this is with Springer, the same thing. You have the same kind of trend going up over time. And here we're reaching percentage as high as 98%, almost 100% of all titles after 3 years. It's huge. And here, Wiley, a bit different. Similar trend also as well. Lower uptake, after 1 year, seeing the low 30%, 28%. But it still does reach also as well after 3 years in the 90% for some of them for the 2015 collection. Similar patterns of what we've seen with Elsevier and Springer also as well. All right, now, okay, a lot of data again. We're going to concentrate on the first line, 2014. This is, if we would have gone an EBA model with Wiley, with Elsevier this time. Elsevier at the time, they had only 1 year Frontlist at a time, 1 year at a time. So this is why I have 2014, 15, all individually. So you see the EBA cost would be around for us at that time for 2014, close to $67,000. So what happened with our usage, 521 titles in 2014 have been used at least once, which is 59% of all the titles in that collection. The retail cost of those titles, just slightly over $100,005. So, as you know, for those of you doing EBA, you can have as many scenarios possible to select the titles you want to do. So, the most obvious one will be most usage, and then you go downward. Then you will probably ask yourself, why am I taking most expensive and least expensive? It's just to show that by doing so, I cannot have less than X number of titles and more than Y number of titles, so the range will be within that. So if you use the most usage title in that case here, you will have 317 titles, which represent 36% of all the titles. And so forth, if you were to go with the most expensive, then only 24%, and so forth. Okay. Now, the same thing with Elsevier. You have, for each scenario, you have an average cost list price of titles. Like for 2014, again, if we concentrate on the first line, most usage will be $11, average cost. Most expensive, $218, $159 for the least expensive. This represents percentage of difference between 109% to 317% more expensive than what we have paid. Okay? So I'll go quickly because we'll go with Springer. Sorry, I cannot show you all the details, all the data, but you'll have the slides eventually, so you'll see. With Springer, the model they have right now, maybe that keeps changing, but right now it was 3 years at a time, 3 front list plus 2 back years. And the cost for us for our tier would be around $100,000 to do an EBA. So 2014, 15, 16, the first line again, over 13,000 titles have been used at least once, which represents 59% of all the titles in that collection. Retail list price, of course, $1.5 million. If you take the same scenarios, most usage, then only 365 titles you would be able to keep, which is 1.6% only of all the titles in those 3 years. And so forth, the same thing with most expensive, only 0.4%, 85 titles. If you were to go with the least expensive, it would be close to 10%, and or just slightly over 2,000 titles. Same thing here, first line only, just to show you the same thing. We have the average cost for the most usage titles, $274. Most expensive, just slightly over $1,100, and $46 for the least expensive. So for all these 3 collection, well, 3 EBA there, you have differences in pricing, unit cost pricing between 79% up to over 4,000%. Wiley, again, the first line only for now. Roughly, it's difficult with Wiley to have an accurate pricing, but it's around $60,000, which represent for those 3 years, because Wiley can do 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, the whole thing, and this represents 3 years, all collections included. So for the first line there, you'll have it was 2,184 titles have been used at least once, which represents 63% of all the titles in those 3 years. Retail price of a collection, just slightly over $476,000. Again, same scenario there. If you were to use the most usage titles, you would have only 259 titles, which is only 10% of the collection, and so forth. Pricing-wise, same thing. If you look at all 3, you have a range of between 13% up to 383% pricing difference on unit cost average price. I'm okay with time? Huh? Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, I'll skip that one. I want to show here quickly. This is, I wanted to know to see exactly how many titles have been used 0 time in each collection year, 1 year only, no matter how many within any year, 2 years, no matter which years, 3 years, 4 years, and so forth. So if we look in the light blue, the light blue 2014 at the bottom there, for 24, so where you have 6% of all the titles 2014 after 5 years have not been used. 15% of them have been used only 1 year only. 15% in 2 years, and 3 years, 21%. Same thing for 4 years, 21%, and 23% for 5 years. So you see, it's almost impossible, of course, for us to predict what's going to be used and how often going to be used. So it's quite a high level of usage. I'll go quickly, but same thing here. This is for Springer. I think I'm over time right now. Okay, very similar trend also as well. And this is Wiley also. So I'll stop there because then I don't have time for this. This is just to show, sorry about that, but this is show an impact of your decision will have an impact on, of course, the discipline, heavily based or not when you go. Depending you go with, my scenarios will be most usage, of course, most expensive and least expensive. As you go with the least expensive from most usage to the least expensive, most usage you will have, in our case, was mainly STEM articles, heavily, reaches 90%. And then goes down, depending on the publishers, least expensive, it goes down to 46%, 50%, 70%, depending. So the choices you're making will have, of course, an impact on the subject collections. I mean, you're going to retain also as well. I'll stop there, I think, because, all right. Final? Yeah. Just to finalize, this is just a quick summary for me. The pros and cons, or the good things about EBA and against the big, what I call big deal in ebooks. So of course, the EBA, you can have a better yearly access cost. No questions there. And most flexibility, of course, in selecting by subject year, everything, that's pretty, you can give that to EBA. But otherwise, the best average cost per title, the full unit cost comes down, of course, with the big deal, buying the whole front list or whole packages. You have access to more content because in some publishers' EBA model, they're going to remove or not allow certain collections or years, whatever, so it varies a lot. Of course, less overall managing time. There's a lot of indirect costs doing EBA, and the selection also as well. And so there's no session bias, buying the whole thing, obviously, and no extra cost at the end of the year. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, so I had a couple questions for you guys, but we can also take questions from the audience. I'll just start off following up with your presentation, Louis, because you're advocating for purchasing large collections, front lists, and McGill has really, really amazing usage. You know, almost 100% of titles are used within 5 years. And I was just wondering, would you recommend this approach to libraries that are smaller or maybe don't have as good usage as McGill?
Good question. I'm not saying that EBA is bad or good, or you have to think about doing EBA. Do not just think about short term, but think about midterm and long term also as well. Of course, we probably have budget is bigger than my colleagues here. Money is one thing, of course, important, and choice of how we're doing it. I think for institutions similar size to us and comprehensive as much as discipline, I think right now we have done the right choice in our case. The data are proving that, yes, that's a good way to go. We'll be able to do that forever, I'm not sure. And of course, I understand that sometimes for other institutions, that EBA could be a good solution also as well. In our case, with those data, right now we're better off with buying the whole thing.
And with Ariel, you use Frontlist and EBA. And I was interested in how you decide which publishers are good candidates for Frontlist versus EBA, and sort of what criteria you're looking at when you're making that decision.
So for the 3 that we went with to move to evidence-based, they were actually the most highly used publishers in the DDA. So that's how we made that transition over. And the front lists were already pre-existing. So Springer, Emerald, Duke are examples of ones that we already had while we had DDA. So we never thought to move those out of being front lists. We kept them where they are. That kind of answers your question.
Yeah. And sort of related, I think Ariel and I were talking before, wondering about Robert with the EBAs at Calgary, yes. Doing one a year and then, doing a new EBA the next year. What was sort of the reaction from the community at Calgary with that?
Well, probably the biggest reaction was with UPSO. We had people who were upset because we had Oxford Scholarship Online in the past, and since UPSO and Oxford Scholarship Online use the exact same platform, people thought we had renewed that. And the interesting thing was we had some tension after it ended, but a surprising number of faculty had planned out their winter semester courses 8-9 months before, when we still had access to UPSO. And so after it was gone, they were shocked to discover in early January that books that they were planning to require their students to read were no longer available. And certainly, I mean, we've had disappointment from other people, but that was for whatever reason, that seemed to be the most significant one. And I will say that for certainly for both Oxford and for Cambridge, we didn't limit to front lists. So we had books going as far back as they had them.
Mm-hmm. And after ending the program, did you find that your purchasing history or your purchasing trends with the publishers that you had previously had EBAs with, had that changed at all?
Probably, I mean, they all publish books that we want, and so we're still buying them. Maybe things slow down a bit for a year, but not for more than a year at the most.
And if we have any questions from the audience, please feel free to come up to the microphone. The session's being recorded, so you have to ask the question at the microphone in order for it to capture.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Tim Strawn. I'm at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And, sorry? It's on.
Maybe just lean down.
I'll just talk louder. So I'll just take a minute. I could give perspective on a smaller undergraduate institution because you're kind of the same, big ones. And props to the East Coast of Canada for throwing all that data on us on a Friday morning in Charleston. Well done. Anyway, so we're undergraduate, heavy STEM, very small liberal arts, and so we started EBA with Elsevier. That seemed natural. And so those first few years of looking at turnaways and trying to figure out, I mean, it's guesswork about how people are going to use it, what they're going to use, and then you know, kind of focus in on collections that you think will get used. But now we've expanded to the usual suspects that you've covered here too. But we use, I don't like the term data-driven. I try to avoid that. It's just me. We use data-informed because data is not just, I mean, numbers are not the only thing that we use to value collections, acquisitions. And so I was wondering, we use, in our data-informed approach, we weight usage by collection. In other words, if biology, had the top usage of like total usage in 4 books, looks like they're being used in a class, we get them. But if philosophy has a larger number of books used, even if it's just one time, we weight the eventual purchase towards that, because obviously for general education or for philosophy majors, they've discovered those books and are using them. And we found that to be borne out year after year. So my question is, I have 2 questions. Do you use UBC? Is that, yeah, you had something up there about consistent demand was one of your factors. So my question is, for those who do EBA, do you use any other factor other than usage to determine your final purchase? And do you ever have usage to the degree that you need to buy over your original set limit?
Definitely yes to your last question.
Okay.
And yes to your first question. So we do also look at breaking it up by subject area as well. Probably not so detailed as how you were describing it, but we do try and make an even balance between the disciplines. What I would also say is, because we also use the selector request, so prime example, I'm going through selections for Taylor and Francis right now. There were 515 librarian selections that they would have bought if the program had not been on. All of those except for 190 of them had been used multiple times. So when you start to look at the overlap between what our selectors would have bought and what got used, it's quite high. So we do take those considerations into effect, and ultimately we usually buy the stuff that also didn't get used, because books can sometimes take a few years to kind of have an uptake. The other thing that we do consider is course requests, faculty requests, student requests. So as those come in, we will also integrate them into being purchased as well. And I would also say there are some high-use titles that we don't buy. We will also go through, and if something has had 5,000 uses and it's like How to Garden, I'm not buying it, right? That's not an academic title. People were using it for leisure. I'm just not picking it up. So sometimes we will do individual decisions.
At Calgary, we would get the 11-month data, so that always means that there could be some interesting data in month 12 that you're missing. Get the 11-month data. Based solely on usage, we would buy every book we could buy. This was tentative, and then we would send it out to the liaison librarians, and they had small adjustments asking for things that they expected would be, but usually well over 90% of our purchases were based strictly on usage. We didn't try to balance those kinds of factors.
Well, that's all the time we have today, so thanks again for coming out, and thanks to our presenters.